So now to tonight's speaker, whose career has spanned roles in local government and the voluntary sector, and who has, in her decade as chief executive of the organisation, transformed not just that organisation, but the sector and the stakeholders that sector serves to support, focusing very much on the structures needed to provide the best service for those many, many people who are affected by sight loss. One of the mergers has been subject to a case study, and I think you will have had copies of that. They're certainly around, and we're delighted to have that association. She's also chair of the Association of Chief Executives of Voluntary Organisations and of the UK Vision Strategy Group, and a non-executive director of a National Health Foundation Trust. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Lesley-Anne Alexander. Thank you.
Alex, thank you so much. I didn't ever think I would get to the stage where somebody announced that I'd been chief executive at RNIB for a decade. Genuinely, it feels like about 10 months. So I don't know where that 10 years went, but I think we've had a lot of fun along the way. I'd like to talk about three things this evening. I'd first like to talk about the charity landscape, or the market in which we're operating. And then I'd like to say something about the prevalence of sight loss and what RNIB is up to in that sphere. And finally, I'd like to reflect on the opportunities that I think there are now for third sector organisations, and to pose some questions about whether we're brave enough to actually rise to the challenges that there are. There are over 160,000 registered charities in the UK. The majority, over half, are tiny little organisations with no paid staff and a turnover of less than £10,000 a year. And then, of course, there are the big beasties, the big household name charities who have turnovers well in excess of £100 million a year. And that, for me, sums up part of the problem of the charity sector, because it really is a very diverse sector, not only in scale and structure, but also what we do and what we're able to achieve. But for me, it's not about size. For me, it's about the impact that charities can have. And that, I believe, is how we should be measured as organisations. The Charity Commission website shows that money coming into the charity sector last year was about £62 billion. And about half of that was voluntary income. It was income that was donated to charities. We employ about 800,000 staff in the sector, and it's estimated that nearly a quarter of the population of the UK volunteer at charities on a structured basis at least once a month. The successes of UK charities, I think, are probably well known. We can all think of a cause to which we're close, be it disabled children or adults with Alzheimer's, be it stray animals or something about the ecology or the environment that concerns you. And actually that too makes it quite hard to succinctly describe the charity sector. The concept of Britishness seems to be very high on the agenda at the moment. And I would argue that it's very British to set up a charity. Most charities seem to be set up as a knee-jerk, understandable, but knee-jerk reaction to something that's occurred, a personal tragedy or something that's happened in the environment that causes you concern. And actually, I think that's part of the greatness of the charity sector in the UK. But is it really so great? I don't know. Because the barriers to entry in our sector are very, very low. Anybody with very limited financial resources and with no experience can set up a charity. And many people have started to argue that because the barriers to entry of our sector are so low, that there are too many charities in the UK. Now, Sam Younger, who is the soon-to-retire CEO of the Charity Commission, has recently said, "There is too much duplication in the charity sector and too many charities are inefficient and poorly managed. He went on to say the result is duplication, inefficiency, and sadly too many charities are not managed well enough. The charity trade sector magazine, that august journal called Third Sector, ran a poll recently among charity workers, and over 80% of charity workers say that they agree that there are too many charities in the UK. And I'm on very public record as saying that I too believe there are too many. I do wish the CEO at the Charity Commission had made his comments at the start of his 5-year tenure rather than waiting until he was retiring. But nonetheless, I think he's added weight to the argument that a number of us believe in. So after 10 years in the sector, I think I'm probably quite qualified to talk about the sector. And I believe that the public has a very strange relationship with charities. Generally, people quite rightly think that charities are a good thing. We are, it's true. And often those self-appointed experts who comment on charities being a good thing also like to comment on how charities are run in the UK. Now, I can't begin to quantify the number of times I've had people offer me well-meaning advice that usually starts with, what you should do is. And I genuinely would find it more helpful if people would start with the question that says, what can I do to help? Now, the most common issue that seems to exercise the public and the press at the moment is the salaries that are paid to the chief executives of charities. People seem to get exercised about the amount of money that we spend on advertising, and the absolute chestnut is how much of my donation goes to the front line. I want to fund small charities because more of my pound will go to the front line. So let's take those three issues. Now, if we start with salaries, quite often I'm asked, do you get paid for your work at RNIB? And I look a bit shifty and a bit sheepish, and I kind of nod and smile sweetly and say, oh, yes, I do. And that is always met with what my mum would call an old-fashioned, disapproving look. It's at that point that I would like to respond more robustly, but I've always got thoughts of the RNIB brand and the work that my colleagues in fundraising do, and I try not to blow it for them by giving a more robust response. But actually, I think the time has come when charity CEOs do need to actually be proud of the salaries that we earn. I've got an American colleague called Dan Pallotta who gives a very, very engaging presentation where he illustrates the point about salaries very, very neatly. He compares, and my apologies to Dan if I'm getting his figures wrong, but I am doing this from memory. He compares the salaries of American tobacco company CEOs, all in excess of $20 million, with the salaries of the medical insurance company CEOs, all in excess of $15 million, and the salaries of the cancer support charities CEOs in the States, all less than £250,000. So it seems from Dan's analysis that it's okay to very handsomely reward the people who sell products that cause cancer. It's okay to handsomely reward the managers of the insurance companies who essentially profit from repairing the damage that is caused by tobacco. But it's not okay to handsomely reward at all the CEOs of the charities who try to rebuild the lives of the families that have been devastated by that disease. Now, as for charity advertising, well, I have had numerous conversations with people who say they think it's all wrong. It's absolutely wrong that charities waste money on advertising, complete waste of money. However, if it's generally accepted that we do great stuff, and we do, and if it's only possible for us to do great stuff because of the generosity of the donations that we receive, how can we raise more money to do more great stuff if we don't advertise? How can we build the relationships with donors that are the lifeblood of the voluntary sector in the UK? How can we help to eradicate poverty or tackle climate change if people don't know about what we're doing. Now, as a community of business people, because that's how I like to think of us, we applaud successes of companies, of businesses. We applaud the likes of Apple and Sainsbury, who continue to increase their market share. They go from strength to strength. But, you know, I wonder how successful Apple, for instance, would be if it had to rely on donated TV adverts that are shown at 2 in the morning on those channels you don't like to talk about in public. How would they get on if the only posters that they could put up will be the ones that the ad companies give them for nothing because they're in the places where nobody sees them? I wonder how much profit could be made in the private sector if advertising was as reviled as it is in the charity sector. And finally, and this is perhaps my favourite, we hear of people that say they want every penny of their donation spent at the front line. But, you know, if you took that to its extreme, it would mean that those fantastic volunteers who clear mines in Cambodia wouldn't have any money spent on their training to make sure that they could do that safely. It would mean that the people that counsel abused children would never receive support and counselling themselves. And it would mean certainly that there would be no political campaigning to expose the shortcomings of, dare I say, government and others. How would we ever have known about those young children forced to sew football apparel for less than a few cents a day if that hadn't been exposed by a charity? My friend Dan sums it up very nicely. He says the overhead ratios and executive salaries are useless tools for evaluating impact. So let me move on to the impact that I think we have at RNIB. I firmly believe that even after 10 years, I've got the best job in the world. And part of the very best bit of my job is that I get to meet all sorts of lovely people. Now, I've brought some video friends along this evening, so let me introduce you to Freddie.
My name is Freddie, and I am 8 years old. I am blind, but I can see some things like colour, light and dark. I've been going to school with my sister since I was 4.
I'm Lisa Woodward. I'm a Year 3 teacher and I've been teaching Freddie this year. Reading is really very much a strong part of every single lesson because in maths they need to be able to read problems and so on. In other topics they need to be able to read things.
I use a braille to type braille in class. I can write just the same things as the other kids do. Things I like to do are play games in the playground at school. Sometimes I'm talking to kids and they just walk off without me knowing, and I still carry on talking to them and they should tell me that I'm walking off and let me finish the conversation.
You find yourself doing and saying things that you would do normally, but you're then having to adapt it to remember you've got to include a child who can't see you making a gesture, can't see where you're looking or what you're pointing at.
When we come back in September, we're going to be taking part in the Read for RNIB Day. Now, as part of our activities this morning, I thought we'd try one of their quizzes, which you can find online, okay?
It's great when my friends are in the class, learn a bit more about what it's like to be blind, and it makes me feel more included.
Is it hard to be blind? Do you think maybe we should let somebody try that? Right, now we need to close her eyes shut tight. In front of you, if I give you the card, do you feel it? It's actually the alphabet. Can your fingers make any sense of it?
It takes quite a long time to sound out all the words, but if I listen to an RNIB talking book, much quicker. And I say that listening to a talking book, I still count it as reading it though. So I'm like, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, I've read it.
During the last year of working with Freddie, I found out that there are only 7% of the possible books available to blind and partially sighted people.
What do you think about the fact that if Freddie went to the library, he can't just go and pick a book off the shelf?
It wouldn't be very nice.
So what do you think should happen?
this will be available at the same time so Freddie can read them as well. It might be a bit annoying sometimes if I can't get the same books as my friends. Help us change the story.
RNIB, supporting people with sight loss.
Isn't he adorable? I fell in love with him from the minute I saw the video, but they wouldn't let me take him home with me. Okay, before I say a bit more about RNIB, I need some volunteers. Now, we all know there is no such thing as a free lunch. Well, there's no such thing as a free charity lecture. Well, not around here anyway. So I need 100 people to stand up, and I think that's just about everybody in the room. So on your feet, all of you. Now, I know you're all good sports, and I know you all want to do your bit for charity, and no, I'm not going to ask you to empty your pockets yet. Okay, I want you to all look around and get a sense of what 100 people looks like. There are 100 people in the room. Now, you'll find, as a reward, an RNIB bag somewhere close to you. You might have to stretch around behind you and steal them from the people behind. And that's my gift to you for being brave enough to stand up. Now, 100 people, that's the equivalent of what? Yes, stay standing, no backsliding. 100 people, that's the equivalent of what? 4 schools of primary school children, 4 classes of primary school children. Some 9 football teams and 1 reserve, just to prove I can count. And 14 perfectly sized company boards. It also represents the number of people who today sat in a doctor's office and were told, "I'm very sorry, there's nothing more we can do to save your sight." 100 people heard that today, 100 people heard it yesterday, and 100 people will hear it tomorrow. Okay, you can sit down now. Of those 100 people, over half of them will have been on their own when they heard that diagnosis. They will travel home alone, having been told that they are going to go blind. And very many of them in those very early dark days will wonder whether life is actually worth living. In the UK, there are over 2 million people who suffer from a serious sight problem. And astoundingly, 50% of all sight loss in the UK is avoidable. If we could but make sight loss a better public health issue, half of those 100 people would not lose their sight. Perhaps even worse, only 33% of blind people of working age have got a job. Others either get sacked because they're losing their sight, or they give up their job because they think they won't be able to continue. The statistic that really astounds me is that 75 of those people who receive letters from an eye clinic can't read them because the font size is too small. I mean, really, in this day and age, is that acceptable? And as we heard on Freddie's video, only 7% of printed material is available in alternative formats. Now, RNIB is a Victorian philanthropic organisation set up in 1868, so we're approaching our 150th anniversary very soon. And we are hugely proud to be a membership organisation that is led by a board of 18 trustees. I know that sounds a lot, but it used to be 140, so 18 is actually quite a good number. But 16 of our trustees are either blind or partially sighted themselves. Our turnover last year was £120 million. And where did we spend that money? Well, yeah, I can play the frontline game too. So for every pound that we spent last year, 84p went on delivering a service, 2p went on administration, and 14p went on raising the next pound, because fundraising does not come free or cheap. We've got 2,500 staff across the RNIB group, and we work on a consistent basis with about 4,000 volunteers. And we do all of the things that you might expect us to do, helping blind and partially sighted people to regain confidence and to attain independence. But who knew? Last year, we produced 14 million pages of Braille. I don't know what 14 million pages of Braille looks like, but it's a lot. We deliver 40,000 talking book CDs every week from our factory in Peterborough. I believe that at RNIB we run the country's largest lending library. And now, every day, as things are getting tougher and tougher for disabled people in the UK, we're taking almost 2,000 contacts to our telephone helpline every day. And they might be the things that you would expect us to do, probably not at that scale. But there are other things that I guess you absolutely would not expect us to do. RNIB invested in a microchip company in order to make things talk. So lots and lots of people who are losing their sight like to watch television. And when there were only 5 television channels, it was quite easy to navigate your way around. Now there are 505. I blame the Americans. Now there are 505. It's really, really difficult to work out which channel you're on. So we invested in a microchip company that has made television remote controls and televisions talk. So it announces the channel when you turn over. And so that the electronic program guide on screen can actually be read aloud. We've got our own radio station that has recently, Neil, I'm going to ask you a difficult question now. We've got our very own radio station that has recently launched on a Freeview on station 7:30. I knew I had Neil in the audience for something. We're the world leaders in synthetic speech. Who knew? But actually, it's our campaigning that has made ATM machines up and down cash points up and down the country speak, so that blind and partially sighted people no longer have to turn to the person behind them in the queue and say, could you put my PIN number in for me? We've got a very clear strategy at RNIB, and it is clear because it's been designed through consultation and discussion with our members, with blind and partially sighted people. And the 4 things that blind people have asked us to concentrate on most is being there early in someone's sight loss journey. So my 100 people, I said half of you were alone in the eye clinic. We have pledged that by 2019 that will never happen, that everybody will have somebody there with them in the eye clinic. Blind and partially sighted people said to us, could you help us to be more independent? Blind and partially sighted people said, could you help the country to include us? Now, I'm fairly ambitious for RNIB. I don't believe there's very much we can't do. But I really don't think we can run the trains and buses all around the country. And transport is a huge issue for blind and partially sighted people. And if you can't get onto public transport, it really does limit independence and therefore your inclusion in society. And finally, blind people said to us, it's actually bloomin' tough being blind. That wasn't the word they used. It's tough being blind, and could you prevent that happening to other people? Which was a hugely generous people, members who had already lost all or some of their sight. It was a very generous observation from people. So that's my challenge. Or is it? Actually, I don't think it is the real challenge. The real challenge is that in the UK, there are 733 charities who have in their objects supporting blind and partially sighted people. Do you know what that does? 733 different charities. Well, it confuses our customers. It dilutes our messages, so when we speak out, we can never be sure that all 733 charity CEOs are saying the same thing at the same time. It creates unnecessary competition. Competition for fundraising, competition for government contract work, competition for a share of voice. Do you know, it even creates competition for blind people, which I know sounds vaguely ridiculous, but we all get very territorial about the people that use our services. I once heard somebody say, I don't know about blind welfare, it feels more like blind warfare out there. Now, I'm not for one moment suggesting that there should be one monolithic sight loss charity, but 733? That does strike me as quite a few too many. I agree that customers need balance and choice, but choice has to be real, and not just the right to pick between 2 underfunded, incomplete and competing services. And I sometimes wonder if we in the charity sector are not part of the answer. I sometimes wonder if we're actually part of the problem. Now, at RNIB, we knew that things had to be better, and we knew that as the UK's leading sight loss charity, we needed to step up to the plate and try and make things better. And our first tactic in making things better was to launch something called the UK Vision Strategy. Now, we know that there's a national cancer plan and there's a national framework for ageing, but there was nothing for sight loss. And so the RNIB trustees pledged £500,000 a year so that we could bring together all of those warring sight loss people and so that we could unite behind one single set of ambitions and messages. But of course, because we're RNIB, we would never just do that without talking to blind and partially sighted people. And we had lots and lots of priorities set for us by blind people. But at least across the sector, we had a shared set of priorities and ambitions. And on Saturday, I was in Birmingham at an RNIB Young Campaigners conference. And one of the young campaigners came up to me, and I think she thought this was an original statement, and I loved it so much that I wrote it down. She said, "Do you know, to campaign successfully, you must campaign together, because fighting amongst ourselves only makes us weak. United we rise, divided we fall." And I loved her for it. So if our first step for being better was to develop the UK Vision Strategy and recognise that the landscape needed to be better, our second step was to work out how we could formally collaborate with other sight loss charities. Now, mergers in my world are not easy. Mergers in my world have to come from the heart. You know, I sometimes wish we had a share value. I sometimes wish we had shareholders that we could buy off in some way. But mergers in my world have to come from the heart. And you know, there are untold numbers of spoken barriers. People actually get on their hind legs and they tell me why mergers are impossible. And they say things like, oh, well, you know, blind people, they need choice and competition. As I said earlier, choice between two rubbish things, it doesn't really seem like a lot of good choice to me. They then say, well, we're loyal to our organisation. And actually, it's usually the chief execs of the organisation that believe that their customers are loyal to them. Most blind or partially sighted people I meet don't really mind where stuff comes from, as long as it comes. And then, of course, they say, oh, well, my staff, we've got a very different culture in our organisation. We're very, very, very different. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't suppose many of us actually wake up and say, I must work at that particular organisation because of their culture. I think most of us find ourselves in a job and then we grow and develop it in that job and in that sector. But, you know, and lots of people then finally assert that, oh, well, we could have an informal partnership. We could collaborate. We could just hold hands. It'll be fun. You know, it'll be fine. No, we don't need to legally merge at all. And actually, when you're the big beastie in the park, you know what that means. It's, well, if you give us some of your money, we'll go off and do what we want to do with it, and thank you very much. So lots of people have got spoken barriers. But, you know, there are a whole bunch of unspoken barriers in our world. Loads and loads of people who run charities, probably us included, are really passionate about our brand and our identity. We love our charity number. I can't actually remember it, but I love it, whatever it is. I believe some people just think it's too much like hard work to try and merge, and we've had some further merging discussions going on over the last year, and I have a very exhausted finance director sitting in the front row. I'm surprised he's still awake, because it is hard work, and unless you've got trusted advisors and people that can bear the burden of that work, you are never, ever going to make a merger work. I think lots of people put up excuses, they put up reasons. You know, I've been told, I don't know how many times, oh, well, we'd love to merge, but, you know, pensions couldn't possibly do it because of pensions. We've had advice that it's not possible because of our pension scheme. And my response to that is always, go and get some better advice, because it is actually possible. And, you know, I actually think that we've got this thing in our sector called founder syndrome. I guess, you know, it's alive and well in all sorts of organisations. But, you know, the person that founded the charity actually can't countenance it. It's being given away to some other shark. Can you have a shark in the jungle? Shark in the jungle. And sadly, you know, when it comes down to it, I am a bit of a brawler. So, you know, there's no such thing as a hostile takeover in my world. And genuinely wish that there was at times, because, you know, sometimes there is a greater good than all of us just being very excited about what we do as organisations. Now, the case study that's been distributed tonight, in all formats, Braille and in electronic format, well done, details our most recent merger. And I'd like to thank Scott Moller and Kieran Hawkes for taking the sector seriously and for including us in your work. Our merger with Action for Blind People and the creation of the RNIB group followed a series of smaller, takeovers, mergers, roll-ups, call them what you like. The language became very, very important. And the minute we start, you know, I've listened to loads of entertaining discussions about, oh, it's a takeover, really. They're calling it a merger, but it's really a takeover, you know. I don't really care what it is. So we developed a new term, associate charities. And so we have association agreements with a number of other charities now. What we decided to do with Action for Blind People, the then CEO and the current CEO and I decided that we knew there were barriers to us merging. So how do we develop a structure, a system, a way of working together that went round those barriers? So rather than letting the barriers prevent our progress, how do we get creative and go round the barriers? Our group structure allows group members to retain their own identity, but it is much, much stronger than a loose association. It is a legal agreement between all of us. And in our group, there are 4 key elements to the way that we work. First of all, Action and RNIB follow the same strategy, and I reflect back to the UK Vision strategy because we had a shared strategy, a shared ambition for what we wanted to achieve. It made it easier for us to see the common ground rather than just see the things that would keep us apart. The fact that it is a legal structure emphasises our long-term commitment to our marriage to Action for Blind People. Unusually, we agreed to rationalise our front office. You've probably gathered by now that RNIB is all about blind people. And we had 2 choices. We could either merge our back office and do all those clever business things, all those economic and efficient and effective things that you learn at business school. Or we could merge our front office and make the entries into services for blind and partially sighted people clear and clean and easy. So we chose to merge our front office, which did mean compromise on both sides. And it meant that RNIB closed some of its offices in England. We closed down some of our space in England to allow Action to grow and flourish. We transferred 250 members of staff from RNIB to Action. And we transferred nearly £8 million worth of business from RNIB to Action, because we genuinely believe that making that landscape on the front line clear and easy to access is the right thing to do. And we found a way for Action to retain the things that were important to them. They wanted to keep their name. Hey, they've been around longer than RNIB, so why wouldn't they want to keep their name? They wanted to keep their board of very committed trustees. And I don't just say that because one of them is in the audience today. They wanted to keep their board of trustees. And they wanted to keep the things that they felt were very special about the way that they worked. And we found through our group structure, we were able to accommodate all of that, but still get the economies of scale in terms of service delivery. Now, lots of people say to me, well, that's fine, but what are your outcomes? What are your measures? And actually, it's really hard to measure because we were doing this. We were planning in 2008 and we launched on the 1st of April 2009. And I have no way of knowing what the economy would have been in 2009 if it weren't for what all those bankers did to us at that time. But what we do know is that the group has grown over the last 5 years. The totality of what we spend, we have available to us to do great stuff, has grown over the last 5 years. We've got a clear route for our investments, and we fund our strategy and not our structures. Now, before I move on to the specifics, move away from the specifics of RNIB, let me introduce you to another of my video friends. This is Susie, who's another great person that I've met.
My name is Susie Simons. I'm 33 years old. I have 2 children. Danny is 7 and Hannah is 5.
Look, the whole caterpillar is blue.
I have multiple sclerosis and my immune system attacked my optic nerves. So one morning I woke up without central vision and I had an 8-month-old baby in the room next door.
Just take all the bits of the stickers.
There you go. How are you doing, everyone? Losing my sight was horrifying and very, very difficult to come to terms with. Did I get it wrong?
Yes.
Completely wrong.
Yes.
The longer I had it for, the more I understood actually how very difficult it is having no central vision. Because you go into a supermarket, for instance, and you can see a shelf and you can see there's something on it, but no matter how close you get to it, you can never see what it is. I already knew about RNIB when I went blind because my dad was blind, and I was delighted to find that the talking book service was still available. And then they told me about talking newspapers, audio described television, and then audio described cinema, and I was suddenly back in reality and back wanting to find out information about what was going on in the world, and all these little pieces of my life being put back together again, slowly, but I listened to what they said. They certainly were the experts back when my dad was around, and they still are, and they really showed me that life carries on. RNIB, supporting people with sight loss.
Poor old Susie got chopped off there. Okay, so what of the future? Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I think the third sector, the voluntary sector, the charities need to come of age. We need to recognise that no longer should we be viewed as being second best to the private sector, which incidentally we've been told to mimic for a lot of years, and I am now constantly saying which bits of the private sector should I model my business on, because it's actually difficult to find some great examples now. We run our charities in an ethical and business-like fashion, and we need to get better at that. But our time is now, and I think we have to have more confidence in our offer, confidence in what we can deliver to the economy. We're close to our customers, we're ethically driven, we've got great governance, and we've got huge public trust and confidence. And the need for the services that we deliver has never, ever been greater. I think politicians and businesses need to wake up to the fact that we are the waking sleeping giant in the economy, and that we're an integral part of what is the new economic reality. Now, I'm both optimistic and, funnily enough, pessimistic about the future in equal measure. I was thrilled to hear Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, recently say that bankers should see their job as a vocation and adopt higher ethical standards. Right on, Mark, that's all good. Then he blew it for me, because I was less than thrilled when he added, financiers should be custodians of their institutions. Really? Surely financiers should be custodians of the prosperity of all of us in the UK, including those people who currently need to rely on charities to meet their needs. I would argue that in part the financial crisis was caused by the financiers focusing all of their efforts on their institutions, rather than understanding the impact they were having on the world in which they operate. The Governor went on to say that board members and senior management at banks should clearly define their purpose of their organisation and promote a culture of ethical business. And clearly ethics are high on the agenda of these clever people in finance, because Christine Lagarde, the managing director of the IMF, followed this by talking on the subject of inclusive capitalism. And she said, most importantly of all, it requires investors and financial leaders taking values as seriously as valuation, culture as seriously as capital. The financial sector needs to be grounded in strong connections to clients and to communities, to the people served by the financial industry. Well, Mark and Christine, guess what? The UK's third sector is here. We're poised, we're ready, we're willing to help. We're willing to share our expertise and our knowledge. But no longer will we be bullied into being the safety net for government to provide the services for free or through the use of volunteers that government should be providing to its citizens, and that those financiers and bankers should be taking responsibility for. It's my contention that actually the charity sector will do this best. We will have the impact on UK PLC and the economy that we want to have when we actually blend some of those business skills that sometimes we still need to learn with some of the things that make us great. And we need to get over some of those, the barriers that stand in our own way of delivering the very best to the people and causes that need us most. Now, before I finish, can you all stand up again? I need you all to stand up. So no sleeping at the back. Now, I did say there was no such thing as a free lecture, but we have got a gift for you. So there is a little goodie bag for you. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to put RNIB in a bag. So in your bag, you will find some really, really interesting things. In order not to be outdone by your last speaker, who was the man from Cadbury, I've got chocolate in my bag. So we've got chocolate in the bag, but our chocolate is not Cadbury chocolate. Our chocolate is a chocolate brownie made by our blind chef who works at RNIB's social enterprise in Birmingham. I've got some commercially available allergy pills. Not in case you found me too irritating, because I want to show off the impact that we can have through our campaigning. We've made Braille labelling standard on pharmaceutical products. So you will find Braille label on your allergy pills in your bag. I've included an audio I love you all standing. Sit down. Sit down. Feels too powerful to make you all stand. I've included an audio described DVD because, as I said earlier, many blind and partially sighted people really enjoy the movies, watching cinema and television. I've included loads and loads of information about RNIB, and we've put some of it on a memory stick that's got an RNIB trolley token. Who knew such a thing existed? But my most precious gift, the thing that I think you will love the most in the bag, is that I've given you an opportunity to donate to RNIB. Because, you don't have to work for us or volunteer for us to make a big difference. There are many ways that you can do that. So I'll leave it to you to decide if you think we're happily married or if we're living in sin with all those other charities. But seriously, every time you look at my bag, I want you to remember those 100 people who today sat in a doctor's office and were told they were going to lose their sight. Thank you.